Belligerent North Koreans and divisive former world leaders have led news bulletins in the last week. Pyongyang has been talking war, and Margaret Thatcher, the woman who became the scourge of the left in the 1980s, has died. Professor of International Relations Robert Patman joins us to give his thoughts on those issues. Good evening.
Good evening, Rebecca.
Now, the North Korean issue is still bubbling away. What's the latest there?
The latest we have, against a month of threats from the North Korean leadership, is that North Korea is preparing, apparently, to launch a medium-range missile, which is making Japan and South Korea very nervous. So it is a sort of bizarre situation, actually, where in the last month or so, the young and inexperienced North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, has issued, even threatened the United States with preemptive war, I should say. So it is a very tense atmosphere, and it is a sobering situation in many respects.
What kind of game do you think he's playing?
There's two interpretations. That he has been unsettled by the annual military exercises which South Korea and its ally, the United States, conduct. He's not the first North Korean leader to be outspoken in his criticism of these military exercises which occur every year. But what is different about the reaction of the young dictator now in North Korea is the intensity and the enthusiasm by which he seems to be issuing threats, and specific threats as well. And that represents a departure in the level of rhetoric from what we've seen in the past.
What are the likely results going to be if war does break out? Surely North Korea would lose, it wouldn't come out with its regime intact.
Well, I think this is the equivalent, to use an analogy, of an ant nibbling the toe of a giant if they're hoping to take on the United States. I think any confrontation would be suicidal for the regime. I think these threats are not designed. There's no evidence of the North Korean leadership mobilising its 1.2 million troops on the ground. There's no evidence on the ground that they're seriously engaging in the prelude to a military war or a military conflict. I think these threats are designed to win concessions from the United States. The one thing that the new North Korean leadership craves is attention, and indeed a dialogue with the Obama administration, something the Obama administration seemed determined not to grant it, not to reward this sort of behaviour anyway.
Is that the only way that you think that this issue can be resolved?
No, I think China is a crucial player here. China is keeping the regime afloat, and there are mounting signs that China is beginning to lose patience with its wayward ally in Pyongyang. And there's been some interesting commentary in China in the last month saying, why are we continuing to support this regime which is threatening regional stability? So I think it's watch this space. I don't think Chinese patience can go on indefinitely. They are worried about the prospect of regime collapse in North Korea. On the other hand, they may be worried about the prospect of this regime staying in place too long. So we'll just have to see what happens.
And on a different note, what are your thoughts on the views? What are your views on the legacy of Margaret Thatcher?
Well, Mrs Thatcher was a remarkable person in many respects. She was firstly Britain's first woman Prime Minister, so she was a bit of a mould breaker in that sense. But I thought her actual political record, while acknowledging that breakthrough in terms of gender politics, I think her actual record was mixed. Economically, despite great emphasis on privatisation, she achieved an average of about 2.2 a year in economic growth, which is not a great record. Also, she was able to pursue some of her policies by increasing massively unemployment, which was funding by North Sea oil. It's often forgotten that she was very lucky. She was the first British Prime Minister to have royalties from North Sea oil. She also presided over a lot of social division, not just through unemployment, but there were riots in Brixton. I think her greatest triumph was actually in persuading the Reagan administration to take Mr Gorbachev seriously. She used this phrase, Mr Gorbachev is a communist I can do business with. And she certainly influenced, I think, the Reagan administration. No one could doubt Mrs Thatcher's anti-communist credentials. And when she said to the Reagan administration, you must take Gorbachev seriously, I think it did register. But she also had some foreign policy setbacks. Interestingly, many people regard her victory in the Falklands as the greatest triumph, but you can also see it as the scene of her greatest humiliation, It should never have happened. She received numerous warnings that the Argentinians were preparing to invade. She ignored those warnings, but to her credit, she brilliantly retrieved what was the worst foreign policy blunder in British foreign policy since 1945.
And what about the response to her death? Because some people's responses have been a little varied.
Yes, and I think it reflects the controversial nature of her leadership. I think she was a person who polarised public opinion. People seem to either love her or intensely dislike her, and I think some of the reaction we've seen following her death reflects that polarisation. We've actually seen, I think this is regrettable, some people actually celebrating her death, which I think is uncalled for. But she certainly, you know, I think many people felt the 1980s were not a particularly great period for Britain in terms of social division. And she did appear to be a partisan leader. She wasn't someone who, whatever her achievements, she did not unite Britain as a society, and I think that is a sad legacy.
Robert Patman, Professor of International Relations, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.